I walked 25 miles out of the middle of the woods and pulled some Indiana Jones shit to be able to do that so I could go get loaded again, right? So it's like I was doing things that I wouldn't have been capable of doing otherwise.
Welcome back to the PMR podcast. My name is Mitch. I'm an addict alcoholic. Super excited for the episode today. This is episode 64. Got one of my boys, Danny, in here, who's a bicoastal real estate agent from Compass, who also works with the Stephanie Younger group, and he has a team on the East Coast as well. Super excited to talk with him today. Met him a couple months ago from another one of my buddies, Trey, and he's a friend of ours in recovery. So I'm excited today to talk with you and get into hearing about your story and just chopping it up.
Let's do it.
Hell yeah. So when it comes to recovery, what's your story like? Where do you stand at now, and how was it?
I think my story with recovery, it started a long time ago now. I'm almost at 11. We call it 10. But I started as an 18-year-old. So I was down bad, New York City kid, doing a lot of things on the street. I didn't know. I came from a good family though, but I was always so attracted to the dark side of the street, we say in New York City. Mm-hmm. So when I first got sober, I didn't want to be sober. I just knew that I was going to die. Like, it was just that simple. I was, living on the street. At that point in time, I had no friends. Everyone cut me off. I stole a lot from people that I cared about, whether it was mom, dad, friends' parents, who luckily I made amends to. That was rough at the time, but my only option was a wilderness treatment therapy. And when you're over 18, they don't just come take you in the middle of the night. So you're literally like agreeing to go to one of these places. Yeah. And I ended up running away from that wilderness therapy as like a New Yorker. I found my way out, and I think through every single move I made just continuously showed me how powerless I was. I was never the most driven kid. I mean, I wanted to do well. I was Dean's List because I had to be in the schools I went to. But I walked 25 miles out of the middle of the woods and pulled some Indiana Jones shit to be able to do that so I could go get loaded again, right? So it's like I was doing things that I wouldn't have been capable of doing otherwise. So I think over time, probably about the first year or two of being sober, and I got lucky, because I went to a wilderness. I couldn't go anywhere. And then from there, I went to an amazing treatment facility in Colorado, Jaywalker Lodge. Saved my life. The people I met there, I had big brothers that were like showing me that, like, hey, you don't have to be 28 or 35 or 40 before you get sober, because look at what happened to us. Mm-hmm. So I think that's how I got and wanted to stay sober and really committed to this. I think was being in some of those institutions, because I was fortunate enough to be in that. Mm-hmm. And then I was surrounded by people that were really, really dope and really wanted to help me. Yeah.
Yeah, I relate to that a ton. Very similar situation. Got sober at 20, and at the rehab that I went to, there was a lot of people in there older than me. Most everyone in there was older than me. And I think what stuck the most was, like, after programming at night, when we'd be like sitting around, like there's a fire pit in the middle, and hearing from them, it's very similar to you. Like, I'm 35, I'm 45, I'm 55. Mm-hmm. You can stop now.
Yeah.
You don't have to. You don't have to drag it out. You don't have to do another run. Because we hear those. I'm sure those voices where it's like, you're too young to be sober. Like, you
haven't done enough. Right. That kills people.
Yeah.
That true. Line kills people.
Yep.
Right. Like, oh, you haven't hit a hard enough bottom. Mm-hmm. oh, you just smoked weed and drank.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know what it's like to do heroin or crystal.
Right.
Right. It's like, no, that person, they go out and do something like heroin and they die.
Yeah.
And especially now, like when we got, sober,
Yeah.
I heard of one guy that did fentanyl.
Yeah.
And it was the patches.
Yep.
I don't even know how he got them.
Me neither.
Dude was a legend. But like, I was like, what's fentanyl? And this guy's
Yeah.
like, oh, I just throw a couple patches on and I'm floored. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
like that sounds new. But
Yeah.
now that like, if I did drugs the way I used to do drugs today, I'd die today.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reality, right?
believe
So
that.
if like you tell a kid or, a grown man even like, oh, you don't know what it's like to really go through it, that person goes out and tries it and dies that day.
Yeah.
It's messed up.
Yeah. Especially with how hardcore everything is now and how
Yeah.
sketchy everything is. That's like my biggest thing when I talk to sponsees or people who are younger in the program or around my age, because I'm still, I'm only 27, so we're still like one of the younger faces in those meetings and stuff. And
Yeah.
it's just like I even tell my friends that aren't part of the program and don't have a problem, like it's the worst time to try drugs just for fun.
Yeah.
It's the worst time
It's
to
the
do it
worst
because
time.
you have no idea. You have no idea what's in it. And but I relate also to the feelings. I felt like early in recovery too, like I didn't belong because I didn't have this like extensive track record to point to. Like I had war stories, if you will, but it was nothing like I would hear someone else share and be like, well, damn, it wasn't that bad for me. Yeah. And that kind of reinforced that voice of like, maybe you should go out and get some of those stories, as crazy as that sounds, just to feel more validated in the group, which is kind of insane.
It is, like I was thinking about, when I was in treatment, and unfortunately, even though like I got sober so young, I was a kid with one of those stories, whether it was like, doing whatever it took to get high. Mm-hmm. And that means whether I was selling my body, stealing things, living on the street. Like there was no low too low for me until I finally hit it. Mm-hmm. But you go to a treatment center, right? Or even if you walk into one of those meetings or something like that, it's like you hear these guys talking about, or women, and some of the women's stories are hectic. Mm-hmm. I love hearing them. I actually heard someone talk the other day that was so moving. You hear these stories that you literally can't relate to. Let's just say hypothetically, if it's in yours, and now you don't feel good enough to be a part of this group. And that's why I think war storying, especially in like an early recovery standpoint, is like the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like all that does is tell a kid that he's just not good enough or he can't be a part of. It's like a form of bullying almost to an extent, So I think you got to be really careful with how you talk about your past.
I agree.
And if you're not showing pain in that, you're showing it in like a positive light, then some kid's going to be like, okay, I'm going to go. Or a grown man or woman for that example, you know?
It's true. And I was talking to a guy, one of the treatment centers that I work at now, and he was telling me, I was like, are you interested in meetings at all? And he was like, oh no, I went to one, and all they did was, tell these crazy stories, and like it felt like, what did he say? And I always give them grace for this, because I'm not in a position to be like correct someone on that in the moment. But he was like, it's just like war stories basically, and they were just complaining. And I was like, that's fair. Like, would you want to try one with me, another one? And he was like, yeah. And so that's dope. But it does feel like, and I was in a point too a couple months ago where I was like, big book, hardcore. This is how the meetings should be, all this stuff. And I got upset in my home group because my home group is crosstalk, and it's always been like that. And it's more how you are today and what's going on with you today, with the caveat of if you share something, the room will then support you with what they had done, or steps and like ways to handle that through the program.
Yeah.
But I've heard some like OGs that are like, the meetings should just be strictly on like the book, the steps, and that's where the magic is. That's where the fixes for everything are. And anything outside of that, like war storying and stuff like that, is like ego and doesn't help.
For sure.
So
I kind of agree with that, right? Because some OGs are like,
oh yeah, they're hardcore.
They're hardcore. Like I was sharing my story at a speaker meeting once, and I was like 22.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was like 22, and these 3 old timers at the front of the meeting got up and just walked out, because I was sharing about drugs.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I love about, you can call it a love-hate with LA recovery, is that it is lighter, right? It's not as serious. Like where I got sober was very like I just shared, right? But it also structured me to respect. I like respecting the room you're in.
Yep.
So generally, if I'm in a meeting that's focused more on like alcoholism, I didn't really have a problem drinking because I just really never liked it. So I never really did it.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to keep things to that, and if someone wants to chop it up with me after the meeting, we can chop it up. So I learned that. I like respecting the room you're in because you never really know. But LA is so, it's so modern when it comes to a lot of this, just like New York, it comes from New York, but even like LA is very similar to like some Denver, meetings that I've been to. And it's a little lighter, which makes it more inclusive, I feel like, right? Because then you run the risk of like the kid that wants to go and try one of these meetings, and he's like, I didn't have a problem drinking.
Yeah.
And then they just feel super out of place and they feel like they can't get anything. So I try to go into rooms or share from a place of just like using rather than like the specific substances.
Yep.
And if you're someone who has dabbled in what I've dabbled, generally you'll pick up on the substances I was using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree a lot. And it's also, for me, I also didn't, drinking was one of them for sure, but I was doing a lot of pills and weed too.
Yeah.
So I think I related to the program that I'm in now the most because of the rigidity of it, if you will. Like I feel like our program is more stern maybe than some of the other 12-step programs, or it can be.
Yeah.
And I needed that.
Yep.
I needed that from a sponsor. I needed that from the group.
Yep.
Especially being like a young man, I needed that.
You needed a lot of guidance.
Exactly. So that's why I
Same for me.
I think that's why, regardless of what letter you put after anonymous, I mean, I could probably I could jump in whatever.
And just figure it out and find some type of solitude in there.
Yeah, in the community, right?
Yes.
Like we always talk about how important that is.
Well, that's really, actually, it's funny you say that because that's really what like helped me out and kept me sober. Like some of those big amends that I had to make for things I stole. I had this ride or die at the time. This kid Blair. This kid rode 7 hours in my car with me to make this amends. He sat on a park bench while I made it. Like I had people like that. I met this kid Evan, and I met him in one of those meetings, and we started, because I lived in Colorado, and we started snowboarding every day together. And then in the summer we'd mountain bike, and he became one of my best friends. And he probably doesn't even know this. Maybe he'll see the pod and see it, but the kid saved my life, because I was lonely and I didn't really have stuff going on, and he focused me. And then those were like my outside people. I met my best friend that I've known for, since the day I showed up in Colorado. I mean, I hated this kid. He was such a douche. His name's Alex, and he's going to see this, and he's going to know it, And he was so loud and massive. He was like an X1, like D1, or I'm pretty sure he was a D1 offensive lineman. Comes from a long lineage of football superstars. Big boy, and he was fast too. Just like I've never seen someone 280, 290 run the way this dude ran. He set a screen on me one day playing pickup, and I was 230 at the time. I'm like a $180 right now, and I bounced off his chest and tweaked my neck. But we became best friends to the point where now we're brothers, right? As much as sometimes we get on each other's nerves, we talk 365 days a year.
That's dope.
we haven't lived together for over 5 or 6 years, and we still talk through. We communicate, let's just say, 365 days a year. Most days we talk on the phone, even if it's for like 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we talk for 45, and I found friends like that in those programs. And that's what ultimately kept me sober, because if I'm struggling, I have someone to pull me out of my house and bring me to a meeting or go do some cool stuff with.
Yeah.
And then the community, I think, is really what helped me stay sober long term.
Yep.
Yeah,
I agree. I agree a ton. My recovery completely changed in the last 2 years because I started putting myself out there in fellowship and trying to have actual friends in the program, because a lot of my early recovery was like white knuckly, especially in that like year 2 to year 4.5. Like it was like a 2.5 year stretch where I probably went to like 10 meetings total in 2.5 years. Became lying, cheating, stealing again, didn't want it. I was like, and I didn't know how, only now do I know how bad I was then, like, so I have a lot of lifelong friends that are not in the program, but I didn't know how important it was to have like lifelong friends in the program too. Like, because they're the only people that can really, I could text you, call you, and be like, today's a hard day. This happened or whatever. And you can understand that at a level that I really don't think anyone outside of the program can. And that's not to like exclude people. It's just the truth,
Yeah, I agree with that, like, especially like dating is a big one, right? Because I think about a lot of people that are sober want to date sober people. I can't do it.
Me neither.
Right, I can't do it. I need extra.
Yeah.
But it's because I have my community of people that are sober, right? And but I always hear stories from people that do date other sober people, and they're going to be able to have a communication, a level of communication that is deeper, because they understand each other on that level.
Yeah.
And then I also think in terms of friends, right? Like you call one of your friends that hasn't ever dealt with this, they're not going to get it.
Yeah.
And I think that's another reality, and that's why it's super important to have community. And then you got someone that's dragging you out of bed at 6:15 to make sure you're at the gym at 7 o'clock,
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, I appreciate y'all. For those listening, Danny, Trey, and I trying to get this going where we're going to the gym in the morning. And like, I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it helps me so much, especially on the days where I wake up and I'm like, there's a couple days ago I woke up and I texted Trey like, I'm not going to make it. And then I sat there for like 10 minutes and I was like, I'll see you in 15 minutes. So yeah, I love that, man. I mean, it helps me so much to have relationships like that. Like, can't even explain it. But in your 10 years coming on 11, how has your recovery changed or shifted, or what's that looked like?
So you mentioned white knuckling a few times, and I definitely did that.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, call it the first 4 years, I did it as hard as I could, worked through a set of steps, immediately started sponsoring people. I got this one sponsee, and I'm not going to say his name, but he blossomed. He was my first sponsee I ever had, and he was like my little trophy, because like to the point where I told him I couldn't sponsor him anymore because he needed somebody even more dialed, more just
Yoda.
He needed Yoda because he was gonna be a Yoda.
That's dope.
And I wasn't gonna be a Yoda.
Yeah.
And I knew that, and I had to let him go. And now he's saving hundreds of lives a year. He has his own recovery kind of consulting agency, and he does phenomenal work. But anyway, I was sponsoring a bunch of people, working this like my life depended on it, because it did. And then it also allowed me, being so young, that I was able to take, at the time, that sponsee I mentioned was 16, and he was bad. he didn't have till 18 to make it, and he ended up getting some pretty heavy diseases that you can get from needles before he even turned 18.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to make it. Like, he wasn't going to make it if he didn't get sober, and that's the reality. So it allowed me to help some guys at younger ages too, because I was younger. And then it's kind of funny when you're like 20 sponsoring a 30-year-old, but
That's wild.
it is, right? But I had a lot of these experiences, and I kept working the program till I hit, and it's not for everyone, but I always struggled with God, right?
Mm-hmm.
God talk. And through my amends, definitely through my amends, I found God until my mom died. My mom died when I was about 5.5 years sober, maybe. And I don't know, I kind of blacked out around that time. But in that moment, I totally was over God. I was over God. I was over, I was over anything like that. I tried to get back to meetings. And I went, and I started going through a lot. I lost about 80 pounds. I'd never had struggled with anxiety and depression before. Because I really hate it now when people say, like, oh, I'm feeling anxious. I'm like, no, you're feeling restless. Like, don't say anxious, because for people with anxiety, that's crippling, generally. Especially people with anxiety that haven't learned how to deal with it yet. But so I started struggling with all these things, and I was trying to get back to meetings, and I was trying to do it, and I had an amazing sponsor at the time help me out. And so I got back into it. Started working steps again, started kind of doing the deal. And at this time, I knew Colorado was pretty over for me. And so I ended up moving back to New York. And this is when I got into real estate. And so when I moved home and got into real estate, I'll never forget it. My buddy Steve talked about community. This kid, in a 2-day notice, because Alex bailed on me, drove across the country to move me back to New York.
That's insane.
Yeah, a rider.
Yeah, what a homie, dude.
A homie. And when he left, I got really scared
Yeah.
to the point where I was crying on the street because I was alone now. I didn't have that community. I didn't have, and that's what was kind of keeping me sober back then, because I was white knuckling it. And I did have a God moment the day my mom died. I went to go get loaded. Some people don't know that. I walked out the door, with however much time I had sober, to go get loaded. And something stopped me in my tracks, and I called my buddy Cable and I called my buddy Griffin, and they talked me off the ledge, and I never got loaded. But so when I got back to New York now, I started going to meetings. I got a sponsor, and my sponsor at the time just kind of was a little sus. I looked for sponsorship to be Yoda, or at least Obi-Wan and Anakin, like at a minimum. And I'm probably going to be Anakin, because he's swaying on the dark side all the time. And just the way he talked about women and stuff like that, like I wasn't for. He was a little too loose. And so when I dropped him as a sponsor, I never got a new one. And that went on for a few years, until I got to LA, funny enough. But my life got better. And I think, like, what I'm saying right now, a lot of people listening to this podcast will probably relate to, because I lived my life in such a small box, and I'm so black and white that I'm either in it or I'm out of it, right? My life got better. I felt more free, and I didn't relapse. But I lived all those spiritual principles every day. Didn't lie. I didn't cheat. I didn't steal. And I said, as long as I did these things, I'd be okay, right? And I still obviously had a bunch of homies that I was a phone call away in the case that things got weird. And then, fast forward 5 years, right? I did about 5 years, 4 or 5 years, kind of just doing it that way, going to a meeting here or there. But it's not like I never went to a meeting in 5 years, but, very sporadically here and there, and maybe like once a month, once every couple weeks. But I didn't have a sponsor, but I had numbers of old sponsors that I'd call and check in with. And I'm having a recovery talk at least once a day. But my my recovery was really informal, is kind of what I'm saying. And it worked for me for a while until I went through some more heavy stuff. A year ago, earlier this week, was the anniversary of one of my best friend's death, fentanyl, right? I got family in Israel right now, and that was weighing on me pretty heavy. My mom's best friend that took me in, her husband, Mark, gave me a surfboard when I couldn't afford one, big surfer. Gave me a surfboard, gave me a wetsuit when I was back on the East Coast. She ended up dying too. And there was just all this death and just brutality going on, and I hit a really, really dark place. So I ended up calling through the grapevine, started going to a bunch more meetings when I got out here, and got myself a sponsor and started doing the deal again. And I took a lot of time off, so now going back through it, it's so new. And it's like such a great experience. However, if anyone's listening to this, like, okay, I can just kind of like go do my thing for a little bit. I advise you not to. Yeah. I advise you not to.
Appreciate you saying that.
Because I could have had a much easier road. Yeah. It's luck. It's luck. It's higher power. It's community is why I'm still here. Because there's a lot of nights where I shouldn't have been. And I think, I'm real stubborn. So when it comes to wanting to relapse, I'm so stubborn that it's that's what kept me here. But that only works for so long, you know? So that's a long story long for you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm sorry for the loss of your mother and your close friend.
Thank you.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine that. I think I really appreciate you sharing the honesty of your recovery path to this point. I think that's very, very valuable, to be honest on that, and to talk about how I stepped away. This is what I did, and I'm back into it now. I think my time out of meetings too, a lot of luck, a lot of stubbornness, and I came to a point too. I remember I moved to LA, hadn't been really doing meetings. And I had this app to find meetings, and I really needed one because I was thinking about, my plan was to start smoking weed again and then see what happened after that, because I was like, it's LA, I'm probably fine.
California sober.
Yeah. And I was at 4 years sober or something, and went to this meeting. It wasn't happening because this was 2020. Went to this other address, no one was there. Went to this other address, no one was there. And I was one night I was just my head was just crazy. I hadn't talked to any of my sponsor or any people in recovery from Ohio where I got sober. And I was like, if this meeting isn't where it says it is, I'm gonna go to the dispensary after.
Yup.
And I went.
Just start setting those ultimatums for yourself.
Yeah, just dude, it was crazy. And I went to this meeting. It was at 7:30. It's called The Great Fact. I met my sponsor there the first time. It was a group of men's stag, changed my life.
Funny
all
how
that stuff
works, huh?
Yeah, it's just the higher power stepping in. I kind of called my bluff on that deal that I made. And,
he heard you.
But speaking about, I got my sponsor in there, and my sponsor is Yoda-esque, and he changed my life. He changed my life because if you look close enough, he hovers off the ground, very soft spoken. He's covered in tattoos, but very soft spoken.
Yeah.
And just the perfect counter to my aggression, stubbornness, all that stuff. I'll say something crazy, and he'll be like, "Oh, okay, Mitch. Well, let me know how that goes. Call me after."
That's what I used to do.
Yeah, and it's it is the perfect answer for me.
Yeah.
Because if you answer me in any other way, oh, you shouldn't do that, or
I
think that's a good idea. Yeah, it's a challenge.
That was me too.
Yeah.
It's I used to do that with my sponsees. They'd be like, Danny, I really want to get high right now. And I'm like, do it. And I'm like, you won't.
Yeah.
And then usually in that moment, they get real scared for a second.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think you want to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's if I lean into that, are you what's going on? don't work.
No, it doesn't.
You know, yeah, you and I are real similar in that.
I knew that the first time we met.
I had a sponsor say that to me once.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm fiending. Like, I just need to like go, you know, get loaded or whatever. And they're like, all right, do it. Call me afterwards and tell me how it works.
Exactly.
And
That's
it's
what he
like,
does.
you know how it's going to work out.
Yeah.
You know?
It diffused me in no way, in like the craziest way I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
Because I've always experienced black and white answers.
Yeah.
It's either a yes or it's a no. So like for someone to tell me,
yeah, go try it out.
And it's genuine too. And I used to always perceive my sponsor as being sarcastic or like. He genuinely means it when he says, "Oh, okay, like that sounds cool. Like, let me know how it goes."
Yeah.
Like, there's no. He genuinely means that.
Genuinely means that.
And like, it diffused me completely. I was like, "Damn it, no, I don't want to do it."
Yeah. You're like, oh, well, you know how that
like,
works.
You know, like,
whenever
you're supposed to tell me no.
Yeah,
you
you're
know?
supposed to give me all the answers.
Yeah, right.
It's funny because he's like, you know what I've realized? Like, because I'm really big into therapy too.
Yep.
I'm working right now with this. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it on this pod, but I'm working with this guy Fernando down at this place called Pivot, and we're doing it on Zoom. And this guy's amazing. So he's trauma inner child specialist. So if anyone ever needs help, I suggest you give Fernando a call. Yeah, this guy's single-handedly been saving my life.
That's dope.
We talk a lot about that. And hey, what were you talking about one more time?
Just like
I just want to make sure I'm nailing it.
Oh yeah, of course. Just like speaking from suggestion.
Yeah,
or
so he does that a lot.
Yeah.
And he asks me the questions that bring out the answers from myself. So it's like the answers are always inside of you, and that doesn't work for everyone, right? Some people actually need someone to be like, hey, you know. But for me, I'm not going to hear it, or it's not going to resonate with me the best that way. And so he just knows how to ask the right questions and like press the right pressure points with me.
Yeah.
And it's like before I know it, I'm speaking it to the point where he actually, funny enough, introduced me to my sponsor.
That's dope.
Yeah. And one day I was like, this guy needs to sponsor me. And he's like, I couldn't do the work for you. So it's like that works the best with me too. So I knew we were similar.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's so wild too how you got sober at 18, I got sober at 20. Speaking to that, and we've been talking about it a little bit, or we touched on it a little bit earlier about some of the OGs and stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear your take on talking about recovery on like in this way, kind of like a public forum, if you will, or like social media, because I know a lot of us both being around the same age. Not that there's like a new wave of recovery, but it does seem like even people outside of recovery, maybe talking about their anxiety, depression, mental health has definitely been more public recently. And I had
I think it's great.
Yeah, I had an OG with like 40-something years a couple weeks ago tell me, if you keep doing that podcast, you're going to relapse. And I talked about this with the guests last week.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, I talked about this with our guest Kylie and Sarah last week, and I feel a lot better now than even last week.
And after you heard that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brutal.
But when I talked with her, I told her I appreciate that perspective, and I know it comes from a place of caring for her when she said that. But how do you feel about talking about recovery openly? And do you see the balance of ego and helping, and how does it look for you?
So this is the first time that I'm like, and like not, you're asking me questions, but it's not like I'm sharing my entire story. However, I would totally do that in case you ever wanted me to.
Yeah.
I'm big on it. I think especially post-pandemic, right? Like it's just gives people another insight into it. And I also think it really, really helps normies understand us a little bit more. Like think about how many normies date people that are sober, right? So like if they're listening into a podcast, it might help them understand their significant others just a little bit more. I also think too, in the case that like you are someone that's sober and you want to get an opportunity to hear someone else's who's sober's story or the way they kind of deal with stuff, it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
And I also think it's awesome that all those, like Russell Brand,
Yeah.
right? Like they make it, like I love it when celebrities talk about it, right? Especially like there's a bunch of pro ballers that struggle, right?
Yep.
Like, God, I love Lawrence Taylor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the stuff he used to do in the locker room before he'd come out in the
Yeah.
80s. Like, I know you're wearing a Ravens hat. Shout out OBJ, even though he left the Giants. He's,
Big game last night.
yeah, I know. It's a rough day for me. Anyway, I think it's great that celebrities and people that do have a lot of clout talk about it because it makes it more normalized.
Yep.
I can also see where the old timer you mentioned's coming from, right? Because it's like people who work in recovery. It's like when your life becomes about it, it just makes it so much more intense, you know? So the minute you start sharing about it on open air or you start posting about it all the time, like, right, if you do relapse, it's harder because there's going to be more guilt and shame behind it than if you lived in the shadows.
Yep. And
Right.
for normies, it's like an instant discredit.
Yes.
And I've talked with my sponsor
Yes.
about that, and he was
Yes.
like, I always felt like this because I started sharing my recovery openly. I think at year one, I posted a coin, and my sponsor at that time texted me immediately to delete it.
Oh, wow.
He was like, "We don't do that."
That's old school.
So I deleted it.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, cool, got you, my bad." And then I think year 4, my first year here, still wasn't really doing meetings that much.
Okay.
I ordered a coin for myself online because I wasn't going to meetings, and posted it. But this is just being honest. Like,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
the flip, though.
Yeah.
Because where I'm at now, I can stand on my recovery.
Yeah.
I have a foundation. I work with others as my
Yeah.
job. I work with others because it helps me.
We're doing it right now.
Exactly. And I posted 7 years on Saturday, the coin.
Yeah.
And I can stand on that. But at 4 years, I posted like 4 or something like that with the coin and stuff. I wasn't working a program, wasn't able to help myself, was lying, cheating, stealing,
Yeah.
And so it's a slippery slope, and there's like an added, you're only making your recovery potentially more hard. There's good things too, but it's like, I don't know. It's kind of hard to.
So we might differ on that one, right? Like
Yeah.
at year 4, right? At the end of the day, you're sober,
Yeah.
right? So I think the best way I could put it, I was having a conversation with a friend that came over last night, and this came up, right? Because it's like, guess what? You're dry for a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, then you got 20, 30 years, 10, 11, 12,
Yeah.
whatever. Because guess what? You're sober.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's what the program's about. It's not about perfection,
That's right. That's a good
right?
point.
So it's like,
Appreciate you.
if you're posting a 4, and I'm all for it, right? So it's like I posted I was that Facebook guy.
Hell yeah.
I wasn't great on Instagram when that came out because I think I was like just getting out of treatment when Instagram came up. So it was like when that started being a thing. Like it was still Facebook, and then before that, MySpace. Shout out. But I posted all of it, like grateful to be sober, whatever, because at the time that was my truth.
Yeah.
And I was, right, and I still am, but back then I wanted the world to know. I also used it as a safety mechanism, right? Like, especially when you were 20, trying to go on a date with another 20-year-old girl, what did she want to go do?
Go out.
Yep.
Yeah.
But if it's all over your socials and it's all over your life, she's just not going to mess with you.
Yeah.
If that's important to her, So when I go on first dates, I tell like 75% of my story. Like the brutal stuff too.
Yeah.
Because right off the rip, I'm like, hey, if this person can't handle it, then I don't want to waste my time on a second date.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing when you're posting or talking about it openly. It's like, yeah, this is what you do. This is your life. So, people use Instagram for, maybe work or for personal or for whatnot. I use mine for both. But it's a part of you, right? And I've even done a deal in real estate, for example, right? Because of being sober, funny enough.
Yeah.
This woman was wearing the the chain with the triangle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I looked at her and I said the words, I was like, "You a friend of Bill?"
Friend of Bill.
And she was like, "Yeah, are you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then we became actually good friends. I still talk to her this
That's
day,
sick.
right? And we met each other randomly. I was leaving an open house, and so it's like, if you talk about it openly, you're gonna help more people, and that's just reality. But I also get where old timers are coming from with that, because that's how it was for them. And the last thing I want to say is, there's still a lot of people out there that look at us as liabilities, because at the end of the day, we are, right? Like, if you don't come into work one day because you went out and decided to party, it's a lot different than, Jimmy,
Right.
that like never had a problem day in his life going out and having one too many. It looks a lot different,
Yeah.
because your one day out of work might be a whole life now. Jimmy comes back in, probably half hammered,
Yeah.
does a fine job, and goes home and goes to bed early. I don't know why I used the word Jimmy, but
Yeah.
I liked it. And so within that, I see where old timers are coming from, but it is the new age. And I also think that we're in a position where we can help other people by using it. And you do it at your own risk. And you're also allowed to do it as much or as little as you want.
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say is, like, yeah, when I got into real estate, I definitely toned down a lot.
Yeah.
And I've heard of people getting let go from real estate firms because of it, right? They're independent contractors, so at the end of the day, either side can terminate whenever they want,
Right.
for almost like no reason. There's no benefits. There's nothing else. Independent contractors. So within that, I decided to be a little bit more careful. But at the same time, if someone brings it up to me in the office, like, "Oh, I'm struggling," it's like, boom, I get to share my story and help this person.
Yeah.
So I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Again, long story long.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that balance of it too. And it's bringing more awareness, openness. And like, if you are sharing it, and if you are a safe, loving place, a good person, you're a testament to the program working too, or a testament to recovery working, which makes it more attractive.
Yeah.
Like, you as a sober member of the program, are the attraction. So it's like, that's what my sponsor talked to me a lot about. I've talked to him so much about the podcast and all that stuff.
And this is the OG, right?
Yeah, this is my
Okay.
This is my Yoda guy, and he never said don't do it or anything like that, but he is more in line with being a loving, safe place and letting those interactions come to him.
Yeah.
So he doesn't really post. I think he had an interaction where he posted it one time. We posted a coin. He just got 13 years. I think he posted at 10.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and he's a tattoo artist here. Got tons of love, like, on his Instagram. People messaging, thank you. And I think he said he got like 2 or 3 negative messages, like, don't post this or something like that. He deleted the post and he said he'll never do it again. And
what's funny is, like, who are you to tell me what to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, is that sober?
right.
Like, is the guy that gets up out of the chair at the meeting? Like, no.
Yeah.
What's funny is, those are the sickest people. They're the sickest people, right? They're not showing compassion.
Yeah. Well, that's like when the OG told me you're going to relapse. I was like, that's hardcore, dog.
That's
like, if I was not in a
hectic.
good place, that might really, it
Screw
hurt
you up.
It hurt me. I'm still hurt by it. I've let it go.
Yeah.
But like 2 years ago, you say that to me, I would have spiraled out, bro.
Yeah.
Because I value that opinion. I mean, I value anyone in the program's opinion. But it was interesting. And I don't want to feed into that, because then I'll get a resentment for the program 100%. And then I'll stop going.
Exactly. So you don't want to do that, right? And that's what happened to me a while ago. Those guys that got out of the chair, right, when I was sharing my story, something that's really hard for me to talk, was. Now I can say 75% on a first date, not even blink an eye.
Yeah.
Back then, like, the first time I shared my story for what it was, I was bawling, crying, because I was so... there was so much guilt, so much shame, so much disgust in myself, that I let myself get to this point. So when you got someone that it feels disrespectful, they're discrediting you. And at the end of the day, like, it's person to person. It's anonymous, right? So, like, for instance, if I say your full name, let's just say I even say your first name. You don't even want that. It's okay, right? I can say this guy I met. But me, there's nothing saying that I have to be anonymous. Right? That's not what the book says. That's not what anything says anywhere. That program was designed so, like, if I see you at a meeting, I shouldn't go talking about what you're doing specifically with your name, right, to anyone else. Like, oh, I heard, Mitch so-and-so say this at a meeting last night. Like, now you're breaking the anonymity.
Right.
But doesn't say that I can't share my successes, because guess what? Every time I shared my coins on Facebook, the amount of friends I had from growing up and from my past that used to call me like, how did you do it? If I didn't post any of that, how are they going to know what I was up to?
Yeah.
So, with all due respect, fuck that OG.
Yeah. And I still, you know what? And I still went to the meeting the next week, and I'm going to go on Sunday.
Hell
and I'm
yeah.
going to say, what's up?
And you're going to just show them love, because that's it.
Exactly.
That's all that matters.
And I'm so happy that I learned to be able to do that, bro. I'm so happy that no longer, as long as I continue the program I'm working, I can take that criticism. I can take criticism from someone I respect a ton that told me I'm going to relapse if I continue to do something.
Hell yeah.
And I can come in and be like, how was your,
how was your
how
day?
are you? And I mean it too.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it with any malintent, and that's a beautiful place to be in.
Yeah.
Like, I feel
It's because you're free.
I was going to say, I feel way more free and just like weightless because of the program and because of listening to others and talking to people like you.
Yeah, catching the programs, it's easy to catch resentment in, right? Yeah. So it's like, if you find something that works for you, like, what I always say a lot? I'm like, when someone asks me what my program is, because most people that when they ask what your program is, they're like looking to like kind of pick at you, for things you're not doing or something. Yeah. I never ask anyone that.
Yeah.
I'm like, what's your recovery look like? What works for you? What doesn't work for you?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's so personal. So whenever I tell someone what I do, I'm like, it doesn't work for everyone. And especially if I talk to a newcomer, right? Like someone fresh, I make sure to be like, hey, what I'm doing now is not what I did years, call it 1 through 4 or
That's
1 through 3, whatever I said earlier, right? Like, I don't forgot. It's been a long time. But it's like, back then I did this like my life depended on it. Now I don't have to anymore. I found something that works for me that I can do day in and day out that doesn't allow me to catch resentments or anything like that. And that's all it should be about.
Yep.
But in the beginning, I do think you should work it as intended.
Yeah.
I do agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. And we talk a lot about on the podcast program building, and how that changes and how that builds and how it always is different.
Because your life changes too.
Yep. And I just started working in recovery about a year ago this month. And I had to up my own recovery a ton.
Yeah.
I was cool when I was just doing swim lessons and like playing video games. Like I didn't go out. My life was small. I was just chilling. I probably could have profited from a better program, but once I started to work in recovery, I like tripled down on my recovery because I was like, I'm working with others every day, hard stuff almost every day. And I need to make sure that I come into work in a good place because I've seen and I work with, I've seen people start to get away from their own recovery and work in recovery, and it gets real dicey real fast.
Real fast.
And
because working in recovery is funny, right? Because most people this will happen to, they make it their program.
Yep, 100%.
Right, so they're like, so I had this thing, because I worked in recovery for 6 years before. I don't think I touched on that. I worked at a detox facility. I worked at the treatment center. I went through in every program that they had there, whether it was the starting house, the middle house, or like the step down house. I've worked in treatment for a long time. I also used to do sober companions, transports, kind of what Trey does.
Yeah.
Before I was like, I can't do this anymore, because I too was like, well, if I'm in a treatment center for 5 days a week, the last thing I'm trying to do is go to a meeting. But I always had this one thing: a meeting doesn't count if you're getting paid for it.
Yep.
So if I'm on a case, if I'm doing a sober companion, if I'm at work, because they'll have speaker meetings at the treatment, doesn't count.
Yep. I agree.
Because you're getting paid for it. That's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're working in treatment, you have to do your own recovery outside of work hours. That's just me, though. Mm-hmm. Everyone's different.
I agree with
so
that.
I think, you have to step up your own recovery, because if you make your work your recovery, you're definitely going to struggle.
Yeah. Well, I heard from my home group has a lot of time. I think like in the last 2 weeks, like two Tuesdays ago, there was 5 birthdays for a total of like 130 years. And then last week there was 5 birthdays for a total of like, and you can try to break that up. And then last week it was like a total of like 90 years for 5 birthdays. Like most of the room is 10 and above.
Yeah.
And that's why I picked that room, because
Yeah, I got to come to this one with you.
You should. I would love to.
Is
love you to
is
come.
this the one where your birthday was?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. But I do think it's important to always keep your program separate, because
Yeah, I think it's important. And I also think like maybe whatever I say will bring it back out for you. I'll give you a little break because you're probably on the hot seat. Like I think about like being in relationships.
Yeah.
Whether like friends or intimate, but this is more like intimate. If you kind of don't have that balance between, your program and everything else, I think it allows things to get dicey in a relationship with another person.
Yeah.
Especially intimate relationships.
Yeah.
You might make that person your recovery,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Or
yeah,
like
yeah.
your savior, you're this, you're that. And so I think a lot of people that I know that work in treatment, they just get too attached to their jobs, where it's like, if I don't do this, like I'm gonna die type shit, because like that's the reality for us. But it's like if you have your program, then you kind of need to be able to treat it like a job.
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to work in treatment or do kind of what our buddy Trey does, or like my buddy Alex is in Colorado, has this place called Surrender Consulting. Likewise, my buddy John Lencioni has this place called Lighthouse Recovery Resources. They're both amazing programs, but they both work their own programs. That's why they're both amazing.
Yeah.
And they're doing big things. So if you're in Colorado and you're in need, those are the guys.
That's
but
right.
They're really good at having like Cable and John. It's Alex Cable, but Alex and John are both really good at having like their recovery, their wives, their children now, and then their clients, right? And the people that they help.
Yeah.
And that's why they're so successful. Everyone that I know that has made, okay, this is me, right? Maybe I own my own shop, or I work for a shop, let's just say, that make that their recovery. Like someone's going to relapse, someone's going to do this. They're going to lose their jobs maybe one day. Maybe one day they're going to quit, or they're going to have to move. Now what, right?
Yeah.
And this is why I don't work in treatment anymore.
It's hard.
I needed more of a balance.
Yeah. And I knew what I was going to say.
Yeah,
I got to a point now where if I have an emotional reaction to someone that's like, feels personal, I'm too close. I'm too close to that person. I'm too close to that client, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I had this week, with a guy that he shared his story with me early on. Had only been with us for about 15 weeks. Probably one of the wildest stories I've ever heard, been through. I mean,
Everything.
I can't even explain it. And I've heard a bunch. I've been in there in a year, and I've been in recovery for 7. I've heard a lot of wild stories. Probably one of the most hardcore ones I've ever heard. Hopeless, bro. Like, he begging
Like
me
a
to just
brutal story.
He asked me to just let him go so he can sleep on the street. He just wants to be homeless with a bottle. That's what he was begging me for that. Like, let me leave, and it's a voluntary program.
True
I said, you can.
alcoholics are like the gnarliest thing to watch.
And like his tears were huge, bro. And like, I left and we were working with him. He was trying to AMA for a couple days in a row. And it's like, that one really, I carried that, even a little bit today, just how like heavy that is. And I was like, I have to understand that I'm at work. but I care about them, but it's just a hard balance sometimes. And I don't know if I'll always work in treatment in this level, maybe because my goal is to be like a therapist and stuff like that. So I can have more of a boundary, but like going into the houses and chilling with them, the lines of like friend and worker get blended.
Yeah. And that's when it becomes brutal.
Yeah.
That's why I don't work in recovery anymore. I truly enjoy real estate. I enjoy, because before I got sober, I really wanted to work on Wall Street, funny enough. Well, it was either Wall Street or I wanted to like go to NorCal and be a marine biologist, which is like two different extremes. But I wanted to wear the nice clothes. I wanted to run around, show things. My parents were real estate agents too, no longer really too active, but at least my dad, and still crushes it in his building though. But I really wanted to do something that put me in those rooms because it empowered me. It made me feel great, and it also allowed me to do something that allowed me to have my recovery over here. Yeah, that I could focus on it and have it be its own thing. That's fair. After doing it for 6 years, and working in it for that long, actually, while I was waiting to get my license out here, I actually worked for a treatment center for over the summer in Malibu. And it was really dope being a part of it again because I knew there was an end date. That's the funny thing, right? It's like I knew I was going to go up there for probably 2 or 3 months, and maybe it would have changed. I was actually kind of hoping it would, though. I was kind of hoping, and then I actually almost took another job in marketing for a bigger treatment center out here before I declined it and went and stayed with real estate, and I'm happy I did. But I knew it was because it's brutal. At the end of the day, like you get close to these people, and then all of a sudden they die, and that's reality, right? I don't know about you, but if I think about my treatment center I went through, I think it's like me and 2 other guys are still alive, and I might be the only one that's sober from the original group. Yep. And then maybe like another 2 or 3 that like from the 90 days I was there that still are, one of them being a buddy of mine, Niski Griffin. Yeah. But Griffin actually is one of those Yodas, funny enough now, and he has his own shop in Texas, in San Antonio. And he does a great job actually with a work-life balance because he has his own thing. He kills it, works with tons of people, and he's also in hardcore. This kid was a lead singer of this hardcore band called Bitter End, which like toured the world. That's dope. Yeah, and one of my best friends, we got sober together, and he still goes to hardcore shows. I went out to one and we get violent and get in the pit and do all that stuff as like sober individuals. Yeah. And he's able to have both lives, just like me, right? It's like I love riding Harleys. I love doing burnouts. I also wear the work clothes, and I'm a surfer, and I'm all these different things. So I like having a bunch of different things rather than just being one thing. Same. That's just for me.
Gifts of sobriety, bro.
That's what I'm saying, right? I actually got some money.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. That's why I've been tripping off so much recently.
Yeah, the gives.
Where I'm at now is not where I would be if I never got sober. I can promise you that. But I do want to thank you so much for coming on, man. Of course. I wish we had more time. I have to bring you back on at some point. That would be amazing.
Chop it up more.
Yeah. Maybe you, me, and Trey. That would be sick.
Oh, yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah, that would be dope. But thank you so much. I learned a lot just listening and talking with you today, so I appreciate that conversation.
I appreciate you, Mitch.
Yeah. Everyone viewing, this has been episode 64 with Danny. Thank you, Nova. Appreciate your help.
Thank you, Nova.
Thank you to the Vic James Center for sponsoring this episode, and we'll keep coming back. Appreciate it.
Let's do it.
Hell yeah.